Well, goodness me, we stepped right into the middle of a drama there, didn't we? And it didn't end there. Peter's tumultuous and often interesting and challenging relationship, trying to figure out who Jesus was. Well, today we're trying to get to what you could call the heart of the matter. You hear that a lot, don't you? Trying to get to the heart of the matter. Sometimes the needs that get presented to you are not the real need. I've experienced that over many years in churches, Sometimes people come to you and they complain about the whatever. Maybe the seats are too hard, or the sermon was too long, or it wasn't biblical enough, or it was too biblical, or there was too many illustrations, or sometimes it's the songs. The songs were too much from that age and not from this age, and nothing in the middle. And what about Keith Green? You have to have a Keith Green, and then you have to have something from the Gettys to round it out theologically. And people come with all this sort of stuff, and it's the humanness. It's very people-y. Aren't we very people-y? If it wasn't for the people, the church would be fantastic. But then if it wasn't for the people, you wouldn't really have a church. And often, and think about this for yourself, sometimes the things that we moan and gripe about, the things that we sort of have the conversations about, are not actually the thing. They're not actually the thing. There's something going on at the heart. And part of our own job, for our own selves, is to sort of get to the heart of, why am I like that? Why am I saying that? Why am I acting? Why do I respond to that person in that way? Get into the heart of things. We use that phrase to really get to the real nub of what is actually going on in a situation. What reveals the heart? Think about it. What reveals the heart? Rhetorical question. Space for thought, just in case you were, tempted to shout out. You can do, but what reveals the heart? Well, the things that we say, the way in which we say them, the actions that we commit, the things that we give our time to, and the things that we give our attention to. If we examine our lives, and sometimes if we even examine the lives of other people, we can see, even beyond the surface, what is at the heart. And I say all that because in this passage in particular, in Mark chapter 8, we see a real pivot point, a real revelation. You see, there's been 7 chapters up to this, a good chunk of time where Jesus has been going around, he's been doing this, he's been healing that, he's been casting out the other thing, he's been saying this, he's been rushing about from place to place. Remember, I told you last week that if you go through Mark's gospel and put a little time signature against all the words which indicate suddenly and then and immediately, you'd find it's a fast-paced gospel. So Jesus, according to Mark, has had this activity going on. And then we have chapter 8, something changes, and we see something significant at the heart of Jesus and the heart of his identity. And I really want us to think just briefly this morning about what is happening here. There's a few penetrating questions. And the first one, of course, comes from Jesus. You'll see it there. Who do people say that I am? Who do people say that I am? Now, Jesus isn't stupid. He's been around. He's probably overheard those whispers in the corner of the inn or on the field or on the road. You know what it's like. You go around and you hear your name and your ears prick up and you wonder what they're saying about me. And very same for Jesus. He would have had an awareness of what people are saying about him. But of course, his purpose isn't really, I don't think, to find out what people are saying about him, because he's about to move on to something else. But that's an interesting question. Who do people say that I am? Who do people say that Jesus is now? Who do people say that Jesus is now? Now, interestingly, I think, when Jesus is pursuing this particular line of questioning, he's taken them to Caesarea Philippi. He's taken them to Caesarea Philippi. And that's not just an irrelevant little extra piece of information. Caesarea Philippi was the centre of the worship of the pagan god Pan. This place is a centre of the place where lots and lots and lots of different gods, both Greek and Roman and pagan, are worshipped. So it's like an absolute hubbub of worship of all sorts of other gods. And there the man Jesus stands with his friends and say, who do people say that I am? In the context of all the gods of the world and all the gods of our society, who are they saying that I am? And of course, in our day, naming Christ is to name him in a confused and complex society. Who are people saying that Jesus is? Certainly since being here on the island, I've heard more than one person say, "Oh, I'm not into Jesus. I'm not into all that Jesus stuff." And I think that's a really intriguing statement, because I have a suspicion that if you sit down with those people and ask them, what do you really mean by that? I think we would probably find that we are not particularly into that Jesus either. Because the world presents to them a skewed vision of who Jesus of Nazareth is. And for many people, Jesus can be a severe person who knocks you about the head with a pan. He's a sort of overbearing, thou shalt not. And I don't know, you'd have to sit down and really have the conversation. Interesting thing for you to do this week. Find someone, hey, tell me, what do you think? Never mind what I think. What do you think about the person Jesus? What are your thoughts? I think you'd find that you probably don't believe in that Jesus either. Then how marvellous is it that we once again have the opportunity to be in situations where we can speak of the Jesus that we've found in the Scriptures. Are you one of those people who have ever said, "Oh, isn't it terrible that we don't do Jesus in schools anymore"? Have you ever said that? Oh, the assemblies aren't the same and the church doesn't have the same access and all that sort of thing. Have you ever said that? Have you ever said it? I think I maybe said it once or twice, but then I thought about it again. And then I remember that the Jesus that I met in primary school, the Jesus that I met in primary school was delivered to us by Mr. Gray. Now, that wasn't actually his name. I called him Mr. Gray because he had grey hair, he had a grey face, he wore a grey clerical collar, a grey suit and grey shoes. His delivery was absolutely grey. There was no colour about the man at all. And so when I think back to Jesus in primary school, I think Jesus was a lot like Mr. Gray. Not very exciting, and was only interested in us being a kind of nice to each other if we could possibly help it, although it was really hard because look at the people around you. And I think to myself, I'm not so sure that I want to be trusting Mr. Gray to a generation of young people. I want young people to know for themselves the vibrancy and the power and the dynamism and the wonder of who Jesus is and his power and his glory. You can't say that at a school, but there's nobody stopping you saying it anywhere else. Who do men say that I am? We are living in a generation who have the opportunity to present Jesus afresh in a brand new way. There was an ad campaign that came out from Sainsbury's around about Easter time, and it was about their Easter eggs. And this top executive, who had been probably educated to the nth degree, working in all the advertising for Sainsbury's, when asked to comment on why Sainsbury's were having Easter eggs, said, "It's because we're remembering the birth of Jesus." And when he was questioned about that, he went away to think. And then they come back and he said, well, it's not actually about the birth of Jesus. It's actually about the death of Jesus. Now, he's getting closer. But, of course, the Easter egg's about the stone being rolled away. It's about the resurrection. Now, educated to the nth degree, but still no real idea about some of the ways and some of the reasons we do the things we do. You can probably think of your own stories about this. But who do people say that Jesus is? Well, we have an opportunity. But asking the disciples that, it then provoked them to come up with an idea and a response from their own thinking, from their own minds. And so they came up with the bog standard answers. They said, some people are saying you're John the Baptist. We thought about him last week, this powerful messenger from God. Some are saying Elijah, again, powerful messenger for God. So people are saying that actually that we recognize there's something about this Jesus. And they're recognizing that Jesus is a significant prophet in a time when there aren't prophets. So there was a recognition there that Jesus was something. But think about that question. What would you say? Even in the church, folks, there are different gods and different Jesuses. And I think I probably have a little unique window into this. And actually, I was speaking to a chap on Friday who's my what I call my spiritual director. I go to him every couple of months and I just talk. I just get it all off my chest and I just sort of reflect. And I was thinking that everywhere I go on this island, I'm stepping into an environment where there seems to be a different kind of God, a different kind of Jesus. There's the sort of evangelical charismatic God in Jesus up at Sannox. And then there's a good, strong evangelical, God here in the Baptist church. And then you go to the Church of Scotland. God's a good Presbyterian. Jesus is a good sort of, and then you speak to people in the street, and then you've got all sorts of different ideas about who God and Jesus is. And I said to him, sometimes I feel a bit schizophrenic. I sometimes feel a bit schizophrenic. And even in our day, there's a need, when we hear that question, who do you say I am? Not just to be like the people of Jesus' day, plucking out ideas from all over the place. Where do we go? Where do we go to get a full revelation of Jesus? We get back to the Gospels. We get back to the New Testament. We dig into the Old Testament. We see the richness of who he is. Jesus is the one person who will bring unity to the church. But sadly, Jesus is the one person who has also brought disunity to the church. And what a sadness. What a sadness. If there's ever a need for us to get back to it, there it is. Anyway, I've got off my soapbox now. Who do people say that I am? But you notice that Jesus doesn't leave it there. He's not just interested in what they're saying out there. He turns right to Peter. Imagine the immensity of this situation. Peter, with foot in mouth, he's always opening his mouth and putting his foot in it. We get this idea that he's bold, he's brash, he's sort of working it out. He thinks, he speaks before he thinks. He's one of those verbal sort of thinkers. Those people that never stop talking? They're figuring something out and they have to talk about it, as opposed to us perfect sort of introverted people who go away and go deep. And half an hour later, we might be able to give you an answer. But Peter's one of those, he's out front, he's always thinking on his feet. And Jesus turns to Peter, who by this time is becoming one of the main guys. He's becoming naturally one of the leaders of the disciple. And he says to him, who do you say I am? Who do you say I am? And Jesus is getting to the heart of it. He's not just getting to the heart of who he is, revealing who he is. He's getting to the heart of understanding who his disciples think he is. How would you respond in that situation? Can you imagine it? General conversation. You're there with your mates. And then all of a sudden, Jesus turns and looks you in the eye and says, who do you say I am? And the response, as Mark tells it, is almost immediate. And how can we trust this Gospel of Mark to know that it's like, well, because as we said last week, we expect that Mark's Gospel is really Peter's recollection of his walking alongside Jesus. So Peter is saying to us, as soon as Jesus asked me, who do you say I am? I responded with, you are the Messiah. You are the Christ. You are the Anointed One. And I don't know how much Peter can take that for credit, because the other Gospels say that Jesus said, you only know that because it's been revealed to you, Peter. You don't know that for yourself. You only know that because this has been revealed to you. But the response is immediate. And I want to say this to you this morning. In the whole question of who do you say Jesus is, you need to know the Spirit moving in your heart to come to the right conclusion. And if you're sitting here this morning with any sense of not being quite sure, A, who Jesus is, and B, what that means for your life, a good thing to do would be to invest some time in exploring that question and saying, God, I don't know. Who are you? But equally, we want to come to that point in saying, Jesus, you are the chosen one. You are the Messiah. You are the one who has been sent from God, who will bring transformation and salvation to me and to everyone who calls upon his name. This is a pivotal moment, because here in this moment, from the mouths of one of the people who was closest to Jesus is the exact proclamation of exactly who Jesus was. The whole of the Israeli people at this time were looking for the Messiah. And they were looking for a Messiah, as you probably know, because they were being bombarded by Roman culture and Roman influence and Roman oppression. And they were longing to have their political freedom as a nation. And so when Peter says this, you might be tempted to think, oh, he's just thinking he wants the same political liberation as the others. But there's something quite unique about this declaration, because from that moment, Jesus both affirms it and he says to Peter, please don't tell anyone about this now. Have you ever thought how strange that is? Peter has this amazing revelation that Jesus is the Messiah. And the thing that Jesus says is, don't tell anyone. Don't tell anyone. Well, I think I've been preaching it wrong all these years, don't tell anyone. Why is he saying that? It's because we're in the midst of a place where there's all sorts of strange ideas of what Messiahship is about. All sorts of things that people think the Messiah is and what the Messiah is going to do. But Jesus wants to challenge the concept. He wants to challenge the concept of what a Messiah is coming to do. What does Jesus go on to talk about straight afterwards? He goes on to talk about the need for the Son of Man to suffer and to die at the hands of the oppressor. So in this moment, something pivotal changes. Jesus is proclaimed as the Messiah. He says, don't say anything about it, because he's about to change over these next 8 chapters what it means to own God's Messiah. What it means to follow in the footsteps of God's Messiah. Jesus begins from this point of continually talking about his death and his suffering. He begins at this point his march towards Jerusalem. At this moment, they're in the north. They've been in the north for a long time. They've been carrying out ministry there. At this declaration of Peter, at this point, they start to move towards Jerusalem. Jesus literally moves towards the cross, but he literally talks in real terms about the real heart of the Messiah. Friends, when you answer that question, who is Jesus and who do you say he is? If you get to the point of discovering that he is God's anointed one, God's Messiah, you too will then begin your path to the cross. In the passage that comes after this is the passage where Jesus tells his disciples, you must take up your cross and follow me. This is not just something that Jesus is saying that he's going to do. This is something that the whole people of God are invited into. And we spoke about that back in January, didn't we? About taking up our cross. The whole of life from this point becomes cross-shaped. So that leaves a few questions for us this morning. It leaves a few questions for us this morning. How well are we engaging with the world out there who don't know what to say about who Jesus is? How can we be a part of that conversation? How can we learn from that, and how can we live our lives in the light of that? How do you respond this morning as Jesus looks at you and says, who do you say I am? Are you able to respond with, you're the Messiah, you're the Christ, you're the Lord? And from that point, are you then able to say, Lord, take the whole of my life. May my life too be cross-shaped. May I lay it down in order to follow after you, to seek after you, to be dead to myself and my own desires, and to be fully alive in you. It was Paul that said, it's no longer I that live, but Christ that lives in me, in Galatians. This is what our life does. This is what Jesus does. And for old Peter, God, he's still got trials to come. If you remember his story, he's still got trials to come, especially when it gets towards that point where he has to see his Jesus suffer. He doesn't know what to do with himself. Even immediately after this, he decides to tell Jesus off. Imagine the audacity of it. When Jesus starts to talk about his impending death, Peter says, I'm having none of that. I'm having none of it. And so Peter just finds himself getting in the way all the time, but then there is that beautiful moment. Do you remember it after the resurrection? When Peter has failed spectacularly. He's denied Jesus. He's denied the one that he's named as the Messiah. And there's that intimate moment again. Do you remember it? Jesus stands in front of Peter after the resurrection and says, "Do you love me, Peter?" And you can sort of feel Peter getting a little bit, "Oh, yes, Lord, I love you. And then as if that wasn't enough, Jesus says again, no. "Do you love me?" And Peter said, "Of course, Lord, of course I love you. I've always loved you." The defense is coming up. And Jesus has to say a third time, no, Peter, do you love me? And it sinks in. Yes, Lord. Yes, Lord. The same person that I claimed as Messiah in Mark chapter 8 is the same person I'm standing in front of now, post-resurrection. Yes, Lord, I love you. I see the picture. I've come into that place. And so for some of us this morning, we may need to hear that second set of questioning. You've answered the question, who is Jesus? He's the Messiah, he's the Lord, he's the Saviour. Maybe you need to hear him standing in front of you this morning saying, actually, do you love me? Do you love me? Really? No. Do you love me? Do you love me? Penetrating questions, life-changing questions as we set our face towards Jerusalem, as we follow Jesus all the way to Calvary, all the way to the tomb, and all the way to resurrection and to new life. Today is always the day of decision. Today is always the day of decision. The question comes to you again from the lips of Jesus. Who do they say I am? Who do you say I am? And do you love me? Do you love me? Let's pray together.